Evening all on Play Chess and streaming to YouTube as well. I thought this week we could have a look at Nakamura again. He's one of my favourite super grandmasters, to be honest, and I admire him because actually he also plays online chess. You can get to play him occasionally online, and I think he's a really interesting style of play. And he also recently hit 2800 on the live rating list, which was the first time in his career. So the Zurich Chess Challenge is a very formidable tournament with a lot of the top players in the world, except for Magnus Carlsen. Yeah, let's have a look at some of his games there. The first one to have a look at is Fabiano Caruana playing white against Nakamura. So Caruana played e4. This was on the 14th February 2015. So only a few days ago, fresh off the press. Okay, so Sicilian defense, a fighting statement. Knight f3, d6. We have an open Sicilian. I'll put on a Kibitzer as well, just in case for technical stuff. Knight f6, knight c3, a6. And this is quite trendy recently, this next move which Caruana plays. Overall it's quite a rare bird actually. It's like not one of the major moves usually, but Caruana's been playing it quite a bit. So h3, and there's often a positional idea behind this, that if white can play g4 and bishop g2, there's a kind of grip on d5 which has been emphasized, and also even g5 might help that grip on d5. Now black here, you might think black might not be interested in compromising that d5 square with a committal move like e5. Often actually e6 is played, but e5 is also quite popular, so black volunteers weakening d5 a little bit more. And okay, can white exploit this d5 square? The knight retreats, so you can see that white's plan, if given time, is going to get a stranglehold on this d5 square. That central strategic square is of great importance to both sides to fight over. Now black tries to interfere immediately with white's g4 plan actually. Very interesting move here. h5, just clamping down on g4. Of course it weakens g5 a little bit of a downside, but overall this is a very interesting move indeed. Okay, so white plays now g3, so he's still going to strengthen d5 control. Knight bd7, bishop g5, pinning the knight, unpinning. And now black, if black's given time, if white routinely plays bishop g2, black might be playing b5 and bishop b7, putting grip and pressure on these two central squares like this. So white's now returns the complement of clamping down on things with a4 to clamp down on b5. Knight c5, immediate pressure on e4. In fact, this is if this is ignored, this is actually, it could be a threat. Just to give an example, what does white do if, well, it's protected, but what if white played something like a5? It seems as though yeah, I mean this is hanging, yeah, so because we've unpinned there, so that is hanging. So bishop g2, bishop e6. Now we see a5 against b5 to be able to take en passant, so getting a grip on the queen side. But b5 was played anyway. In return, black's going to get an active b file here on the en passant, which is played. So queen takes. We see, yeah, there's some queen side pressure. There's a structural concern though still on d5. So at this moment, let's make this a little bit interactive. So what colour would you prefer here? Would you like to play black or white here? If you were to assess this position just intuitively, or what would you like? Who do you think is better, white or black here? Or do you think it's about equal? It's you know, it's quite interesting because there's pressure down both the B file and the C file potentially. White tries to neutralize the pressure now. Okay, so White plays B3. Now both sides castle, and we see A5. Okay, so locking down against B4 potentially, which could have been useful in the future. Queen D2. Now pressure on that C file, rook Fc8, but pressure on D6 now. And note that any bishop takes F6 is going to be awkward for this D6 pawn. Black doesn't usually want double pawns, so D6 seems the classic liability here with this pressure blasting down. Very interesting move now is played. A4, attacking White's structure on the queen side. After taking, here it's a very sharp position. Interesting would be to consider something like Queen B4, Queen A5. These are all tactical moves. There's also even ridiculous looking Rook A6 just to protect D6. But Necker chooses another interesting move, Bishop C4. So he's got definite pressure on White's position here. A5, and the queen goes back. Let's have a look on Rook takes A5 here. This might be bad because the bishop takes F6, and if takes, then Knight D5 hits the queen and the rook. That's pretty bad news. Okay, so A5, Queen D8. So it looks as though White looks to be doing quite well here, and proceeds now to forcibly win this D6 pawn with this bishop takes F6. It would actually be quite, it looks like a bad idea. It looks terribly ugly to take like this. This wasn't played. Knight D5, and White's comfortably better, dominating that D5 square. For example, like this, White's significantly better and has got things to attack. So no, Necker gives up. He'd rather give up his D6 pawn. He plays bishop takes F6. So the D6 pawn goes, and we've got to assess the counterplay which is resulting here. In this position, A5 is a bit vulnerable now, and so is the rook to this tempo gain, a Knight B7. So Black's gaining a pawn back. Rook takes A5. Still a pawn down, I think, is a cause of concern against Caruana here. But can Black generate some counterplay from this position? Funny enough, Caruana didn't exchange rooks here. Maybe that's an okay move. Rook takes, followed by Knight takes A5. Maybe this is the way to play it. Simple. It looks pretty simple and strong. But in fact, here Rook B1 was played, and now Knight C5. And all of a sudden, actually, Black's position is quite dangerous. This bishop in particular could be very useful. Things like H4 to try and provoke dark square weaknesses, and Bishop G5. This could be getting quite awkward if this bishop can be used in this position. Knight D5 trying to snatch that bishop. Bishop G5 is an option here, but the bishop actually went to D8. H4 taking away the G5 square and stopping H4. So it seems as though White's got good control over the position. And a pawn up. So it's quite difficult though to really I think, play this position with white, even though he seems to have accomplished that strategic ideal. Black has that A file and has certain pressure. Can he make use of the A file and the dark square bishop somehow? We see rook A3 here, knight EC3, rook C8, A8, so cementing control of the A file. And also, I think there's a concrete threat in this position of now playing bishop A5. This is a nasty pin, has emerged on the scene to be reckoned with. Bishop A5. White plays his rook back, maybe against this. So the bishop's already making its presence felt a little bit, and in fact goes to A5 anyway, dislodging the knights really. So the knight, this knight goes to B5, hitting the rook, and the rook goes to A2 now, so some pressure. Now it's actually, it seems, well, white targeted this pawn here. How does he defend C2? Well, maybe he could have tried knight E3, actually would defend C2 and hit the bishop. That's an idea, followed by, say, rook A1. This is an idea. But white actually played here bishop F3. And let's see, in this position, G6 was played, protecting that pawn. If rook takes C2, this might tactically be awkward after knight A3. So that was avoided. In this position, it is tricky. You know, how does black avoid losing material? So, okay, just G6 here for the moment. And here, yes, it's a very interesting position with these two bishops. Black has got active pieces. White maybe starts going a little bit astray. Caruana played this check, which I'm not entirely sure helps control the position that much. Although it seems logical to gain the tempo to play knight c6 and hit e5. As an alternative, before we go into the game, knight d6, that's interesting, just hitting the bishop. And what does black do here? This sort of position, if white gives up that pawn, there could be a nasty pin here, for example. I think white is a little bit better there. So that's an interesting way of playing it. But yeah, knight e7 check was played, king g7, knight c6, and it looks really good. It does look really good to hit this guy. And okay, we see though a counter-attack move, knight a4, so heading for that c3 to fork the rooks. Knight d6 hits the bishop. Bishop goes to e6. And black is really threatening this dangerous knight c3. It's a very awkward position actually now for white. He plays a very, very logical move though in the circumstances. Rook b7, so still a little bit better, trying to coordinate pressure. If you can take here, more coordinated pressure coming. And we have an exchange of pawns in effect. Rook takes c2, knight takes e5. Funny enough though, after this rook takes c2, technically maybe a stronger move here, the knight takes e5. Let's see if anyone's still awake here. There's actually the engine suggestion here is something else. So knight takes e5 was played in the game. What would you also consider here? There seems to be a very strong tactical move available to white, which might have kept a small advantage here. If I give you 20 seconds here, what would you play? What would you play with white? It's an interesting tactical position. It's a bit of a chaotic game. Both sides getting into each other's 7th ranks here. Yeah, it seems like a simple and strong move to take a centre pawn. I don't know if generalisations help us though in such positions. It's very hard to generalise because king safety might be more important than central control. And there's actually a move knight takes f7. This is an engine suggestion. Knight takes f7 is interesting. So if takes, then that's really, really good. Because we're going to be taking there. And if here this doesn't help, knight takes f7, and then we're going to come with check here. And white ends up being better there. That's a really interesting move, knight takes f7. And maybe it gets crazy. But anyway, we see knight takes e5, and it seems entirely logical and really scary that everything's coordinating on f7. It does seem really quite scary. But there's a tempo gain, knight c5 now on the rook. The rook goes to e7, and it seems fine on e7, except there's a small, tiny snag with rook e7. It might be the best move in the position, but there's a snag. Just king f8. The king comes to defend himself. And now white is getting tangled. It is getting pretty tangled here. The knight is also defending e6, so there's no naughty tactic like this to win e6 because we're protecting e6. We've got e6 protected. So this is awkward now. White plays knight c6 to defend the rook. Okay, so they look pretty, the knights, but there's nothing being attacked now. And now it's Nakamura's turn to generate some threats of interest, significance. He plays actually knight b3. And knight b3 carries with it certain ideas actually, including knight d2. That could be useful hitting the bishop, and also bishop b6, coordinating on f2. It's funny symmetry actually, because white was trying for black's f7 pawn just now, and f2 is the mirror image pawn. So they're both going for each other's one remaining kind of closest to the king pawn to try and strip each other's king safety away. But so this bishop b6 though, there's no counter dark square bishop. White hasn't got a dark square bishop here, so this could be pretty painful, this bishop b6. It's a very painful looking threat to deal with, it seems. White okay, let's have a look at some alternatives here. The knight maybe would like to take the bishop, but of course the king could then take this rook, and black will be better here. Doesn't seem to be that nice a position with this bishop b6 as a major threat. White tries e5. Okay, but now we see bishop b6 coordination on f2, and it's not so easy to defend this. This is going to be hopeless surely to knight d2, among other things. So here white's game just collapses. It seems f2 is more significant than f7. We see the move rook b7, and white simply collapses here after bishop takes f2 check, king g2, bishop c5 discovered check. It's actually a forced mate in this position. It's absolutely a forced mate all of a sudden. king h1, and now the rooks just double here, threatening mate in 1, and it's suddenly over. Unbelievable. And the knight is also conveniently covering the d4 square. You know, white might try and... White hasn't even got any defense on this diagonal. So white resigned here. It was a very sudden collapse. It's a very complex tactical battle, to be honest. And I don't know anyone's going to remember anything about this game in the future, except both sides went for each other's f2 pawn, and Nakamura, you know, he quite nicely coordinated his attacking pieces in the end. Let's just have a look at that again. What on earth happened there to white? He seemed to be sitting in quite a comfortable position. Something hit him. I don't know exactly what. And I've played through this game a few times before this, actually. And yeah, it's like Nakamura, he got some counterplay, very strong counterplay. So a5 looks very positional. It's all very positional. Clamped down on b5. It was played anyway. So we have some queenside pressure. And then this idea of getting the bishop more active on this diagonal was coming up here with this move a4, which is actually a top engine choice, by the way, a4. So a temporary pawn sack. I mean, this is the structure to attack, you'd think. But, you know, what the compensation here, what was very interesting from a technical point of view, when bishop c4 was played, there was also, I mean, this move queen b4, apparently it should be quite good for black. You know, if taking, for example, taking, it should be okay for black, technically. Black's got the bishop pair, it's holding e5 here, and it seems with a move like h4, this isn't so bad for black. There's enormous pressure in the position to compensate for the pawns, but it's very, very subtle stuff, the compensation with the bishop pair. But anyway, so queen b4 is also interesting, but this is interesting. Tactical move, not falling for a trap with rook takes a5. That would be pretty bad after bishop takes. And if rook takes, then we have bishop takes e7. So the queen for a moment, so it seems like a pure pawn sack for the moment. And then leading on to another pawn sack here. It's a bit of a crazy game. So 2 pawns down at this moment, in fact. 2 pawns down against someone 28-11, one of the highest rated players in the world, Caruana. 2 pawns down. It's a mysterious game, I've got to say. I don't know what you guys think about this. If we look at this position, it's 2 pawns down for black. It's crazy. So, but black, by a forcing sequence with knight b7, is still retaining what the bishop pair. Now, from the chaos, what we know about the bishop pair is they complement each other. You know, the dark square bishop, light square bishop. Is the attacking players love the bishop pair. They're stronger together. If you have the bishop pair, it's like they're much stronger together. And it seems, although black now is he's only 1 pawn down, and he's got that dangerous bishop pair. And it seems actually f2 and f7, the contrast here is interesting. So white eventually going in for the attack, you know, like this on the f7. Black waited, it seemed, for a moment, then inviting the knight in. And yeah, now white went in for knight e7 check and knight c6. It just seemed very, very tempting stuff. So both knights converging with the rook. You'd think this is all pretty good stuff to converge on f7, but somehow Black's counter-attack on f2 seems stronger. The positional background is, as I say, the dark square bishop hasn't got a counterpart for white. So if there's some theoretical basis for black being stronger to attack f2 than white to attack f7, I think it's in the dark square bishop. So rook takes c2, knight takes e5, retaining a pawn up for the moment, but with king safety issues now, more than black. Because black now plays another forcing move, hitting the rook, evicting the rook. Probably best was to put the rook right back. That's the computer move, but it seems a humble retreat, defeatist. But probably that was the best idea in this position. But instead we see rook e7, and now the king coming to repulse the rook. And at least take away the pressure. You see the pressure release off f7 now, which gives black time to attack f2. So all he needs to arrange is this bishop hitting f2. He does that with knight b3, and you know, white's discoordinated on f7 now, and we see just a complete collapse now, with white getting mated basically very suddenly in this position. It's a fascinating game tactically. I really don't know if anyone's going to get anything from this game in the future. It's just a fascinating tactical encounter. I don't know what we can say about it. Sometimes it's good to sacrifice a pawn or two to get the bishop pair and get faster attack. I don't really know what conclusions you can draw more broadly. A very interesting encounter though. Another very exciting game of Nakamura was against Vladimir Kramnik. So, okay, Kramnik playing white in, I think it was round 2. I'm not entirely sure. I've got the PGN's exact from my source. I think it was round 2. Knight f3. The Reti opening, keeping flexible. d5 for Nakamura. g3. Knight f6. Bishop g2. And black locks in his own bishop here. You might think something like this. I'm thinking that might be in Leibert's move, but actually the most common here is actually c6 or e6. These are the two most common moves in the position, c6 or e6. e6 was played. White castled, bishop e7, c4, castles, and now double fianchetto from Kramnik, b3. So he likes both bishops like fianchettoed sometimes, goes in for this, knight c6. Now white takes on d5, and we see knight takes d5, and now white plays d4. So he's opening up the centre. C takes, knight takes, and note here this bishop is looking potentially at g7 soon, in fact. But there's a key defensive move surely in bishop f6. Knight takes d4, queen takes d4, threatening mate. Bishop f6, sufficient. Queen d2. One problem for black in this position, and it's a problem with many Queen's Gambit declined structures, is the bishop on c8 is often a problem piece to try and resolve. And I've had a recent over the board game myself. I tried to dynamically solve this c8 problem, and here there's a dynamic solution to the c8 bishop. If we're not careful, we get blasted in this position. How do we solve this problem here? How would you guys solve this? Black to play. So we're on the brink of a total opening disaster if we don't play this correctly. Because there's a lot of pressure here. Black to play. I wonder what you would suggest if I gave you 20 seconds. It's actually the top engine move as well. Nakamura's choice here is the top engine move, funny enough. Actually, I don't think it even loses material or anything. It's just a nifty move. But we'll look at alternatives. So he wants to try and avoid getting a bad, getting a disadvantage here from this position. It's quite easy to get a major disadvantage sometimes with black. Well, okay, if we look at the obvious move, which wasn't played, I mean, say we wanted to just play this. Actually, I think white can get an advantage here by force with bishop takes. And here, knight c3 would be annoying. If bishop here, knight takes, and white could end up with a significant advantage, a pawn up. So actually, you've got to be careful with b6. Actually, bishop d7 was played. Bishop d7. So it looks as though d5, you know, is going to be supported now with bishop c6. And Vladimir gives up his Fianchetto bishop. And he's often done this in several games with great success sometimes. A lot of players are fearing, you know, the light square weaknesses, but sometimes in the particular positions, the light square weaknesses are not that exploitable. I mean, the key thing is how exploitable these things are. So giving up the voluntarily that Fianchetto bishop seems like quite a committal decision, though. E takes. Now with the bishops staring at each other, like a spaghetti western. Queen takes d5 is not possible. White keeps the pressure though with rook d1. Okay, so he's isolated that pawn, but black solved this bishop for the moment. Rook c8, and tactically this is interesting. You know, if bishop takes, queen takes, we're looking at the rook. You know, so this should be okay for black. There's counter pressure here. So white actually played knight c3, and things start to go really crazy now about this d5 pawn. Bishop c6. So is d5 a problem? Well, white plays knight takes d5 now, temporarily sacrificing a piece to try and exploit the position of the black queen. After bishop takes, queen takes, bishop takes, temporarily a piece up, but now e4. If white can get away with this, he will be a pawn up in this position. So this is the sequence which Kramnik was hoping might get him a significant advantage. And also Kramnik might have been quite confident with this position, because if you remember back to the London Classic December last year, Nakamura was crushed. Actually, he tried the King's Indian defence in the December encounter against Kramnik and was crushed. So did he have something good here, or was he going to grovel a pawn down for hours and hours from this particular position? What would you play here? Black to play here. A very interesting move. I hope some of you have not seen this game before. Anyone? So black to play. Again, you're risking having this permanent disadvantage to grovel for hours and hours with. So is there anything you can do here to make things interesting. Any thoughts? No? Any suggestions? Alright, I think C5 has been mentioned. Is that Rook C5? E5's been... What is it? What is it? E5 and C5? They're not legal moves. It's black to play here. I think Rook C5 doesn't... I'm not sure that helps actually, because a Rook AC1 might be strong. And if it takes... We end up with the same situation here with this pin. No, we see the move bishop takes e4. So keeping the bishop, but sacrificing the queen. Rook takes, rook takes. So we have a material imbalance situation, which is very interesting. White has, of course, weakened these light squares, and there's a light square bishop to celebrate that. The queen, though, surely, if the queen gets exploitable targets, she's going to be a menace. But has the queen got exploitable targets to practice on? This is the other factor. So we have an interesting position here. We see the move b4 being played. Interesting, b4. Yeah, I don't know what to make of this position. If queen e2, let's just run through a line. If the queen hasn't got that exploitable targets, I'm not sure what white is doing. Yeah, but b4 was played. Okay, so maybe b5 is interesting for b6 later. a6, a4. So going for b5, trying to get a dangerous pawn. Rook c4, rook e1. Now white is threatening with rook e1 this cheeky queen e5 for a back row mate time. If the bishop moved, there'll be, you know, potentially danger here. Let's just check that, because there seems to be also bishop c6. Let's just give black a move which might not be wise. Black made space for his king. If he plays something like this, queen e5 here, b5, and then this is disaster, for example. So black's got to be careful. He just made space for his king. Sensible. After this rook e1, he just played h6. Okay, so queen e5, and now bishop c6, which actually now threatens the skewer. But potentially that's useful for black. But black's also threatening just taking on b4. So things have speeded up here, it seems. Furthermore, if the queen goes back, let's see, if the queen just went back here, actually black just nabbed this pawn, and that's not too clever to lose that pawn. So Vladimir, in this position, played what might be the strongest move actually, to return the queen. If he tries to keep the queen with queen a5, it's another idea. Holding these two and attacking the rook. This should be okay for black. It looks okay. This sort of position. There's going to be a perpetual or something. So already it seems black's in a promising position to try and get a fortress. So perhaps with some of these variations like this, Vladimir played b5, knowing full well his queen can be skewered. He's going to return the queen here. So rook e8, and we transition into a peaceful looking rook and pawn ending after all that. Yeah, show's over, unfortunately, for the game. Entertainment value. The rook and pawn ending doesn't last too long before a draw is agreed. Rook b5 here. Then, just to get rid of these dangerous outside pass pawns, and then soon to be a draw. But yeah, it was a very interesting. If we rewind back, this c8 bishop problem. If we rewind back, it's a cause of many players to lose horribly. The c8 bishop. I think Magnus Carlsen won a game recently, just destroying his opponent's c8 bishop. I think it was in the tie break of the Grenk against Nxd4. Nxd4's c8 bishop in one of the tie-break games was a disaster, and it helped decide the tie-break. But the way it was creatively solved, it seems, Kramnik had relentless pressure to gain a small advantage, but Nakamura with bishop d7, and yes, this very dynamic looking and risky bishop takes d5, there was this sort of counter queen sacrifice, which seems to, it just seems to get a very interesting position. If he didn't play the counter queen sacrifice, it just seems like a long grovel. Say queen e7. This is going to be a long grovel here, a pawn down. So yeah, in retrospect, it was probably a wise decision, and made the game look quite fun actually. So bishop takes e4. So who would have thought black can play this? Very interesting counter queen sacrifice, and then white dissolves the position, dissolves the tension, so we get this rook and pawn ending. Okay, let's go on to another game. This was a fascinating encounter. Nakamura playing white against Kariakin. So we'll flip the board. Knight f3. None of this e4 business. So sometimes the quieter openings avoid too much opening theory. So a symmetrical English opening for the moment. And d4 was quite popular here. That was played. e6 is a very, very logical move. g3, and this annoyance move is the most popular actually, just to play queen b6. There's another one, bishop c5, that's also quite used frequently. Queen b6, and actually we enter a very sharp continuation now. Often players with white would play the knight to b3. I'll just quickly show you this. If we play the knight to b3, we play often like this, where there's quite a few games from this sort of position. Swings and roundabouts. We've got the double pawns, but we've got the bishop here. There's quite a few games from there. But actually we see this sharper alternative, knight db5. So things like that look as though they're going to be useful later. Or bishop e3 to harass the queen without dropping b2. It blocks b2, so bishop e3 is also a nuisance. Or even bishop f4, just coordinate for c7. So black played here knight e5. That's the top used move in this position, and we see now bishop f4. And the queen, yeah, what is it doing there without development, you might ask? It is looking at f2. This is a bit crazy, isn't it? Because isn't black neglecting developments? It's like theoretical, but let's have a look at this position before bishop f4. If we play bishop e3, black might be doing well here with queen c6. And then what? It's pretty sharp stuff. But yeah, we see bishop f4, and now knight fg4, just looking at f2. And to be honest, I don't really know the theory of these positions instantly. I don't know how many of you do, but if white plays a routine move here to defend f2, white could be left with a serious disadvantage in this position. If we play the move e3, for instance, then queen c6 is actually black's friend here again. Say, I don't know, what would we do here? Say this. Bishop c5, again looking at f2, and it starts to get a bit nasty. You know, if we take here, takes black's doing wonderfully well. So, don't want to give black that. Instead, we see a much more dangerous move, looking much more dangerous than e3. Although e3 is quite popular, usually after e3 games go like this. There's about 20 games which went like this. Crazy sequence. But anyway, e3 wasn't used. So we see another move which has been played before, queen a4, just offering the f2 pawn. But is there time for the queen to take this and then return back? What about these issues, the c7 issue? Okay, so this is very, very interesting. Actually, queen takes f2 is hardly ever played. There's only one game in Livebook with queen takes f2. Let's have a look. Queen takes f2. King d2. And queen might return back to defend c7. But white can be looking quite good here. There's a lot of compensation, it seems, in this position. It seems very, very dangerous. In fact, if that's the best move, if that's one of the better moves, that's obviously it's a very interesting position, rich in possibilities. But it seems white is going to be better. That bishop looks like a horrible piece here. So yeah, this is a very, very sharp continuation, this queen a4. Another tactically crazy game. The most common move was played, which is g5. And white usually takes on e5 here. And actually, apparently, this whole line should be a theoretical draw. But it's an amazingly complicated variation to try and remember to draw this with black. I mean, this is seriously complex. Queen takes f2, check, king d1. Knight takes e5. So white is invited to take this rook. He does that, check. Black needs to know exactly how to draw this position. He's playing the correct move so far, check. And then knight takes c4. And here, both sides have to know exactly what they're doing, really. White plays e4. And at this point, on move 15, Caruana just forgot, I believe, if he had investigated this line, I don't know when he did, but I think he must have forgotten his analysis. And there was something on Twitter about being really, I think he was annoyed about this. The way to draw this is extremely technical. Okay. Let's have a look. The way for black to draw this position, so he's just lost the rook, would be something like this. Queen d2. Okay, now if king b1, we take their mate. So the king goes to b3. Queen takes b2. King takes c4. Bishop g7 on c3. Queen a5 check. this is just crazy stuff, but you would have to know it with black. Queen takes g5, f6. Now, if queen takes g7, white would get mated with mating 2 with check. And if knight b5, we've got bishop takes, checkmate. And if king d4, we have queen f2, checkmate. So that's why white doesn't take on g7 here. It's a bad idea to take on g7 because the bishop a6. So white goes, white would usually, in this position, go back here. And then black now plays bishop a6, forcing queen takes, and then f5. And black securing a draw in this position. This is the way to draw. The evaluation now is 0.00 with all the sort of candidate moves for white. And who would have thought Karaoke didn't remember this line? I mean, I don't know. It's crazy, isn't it? This is a crazy line, but you'd have to know this to draw. Whatever white does in this line is now it's equal. For example, I think this is perpetual check time with rook b1. We take here, check, check. It's perpetual check time. Rook b3 is forced, check, check, check. If king d3, we take the queen with check because we've blocked the bishop. So it's like a perpetual check here. Okay, this is one perpetual check line. With rook b3. I'm kidding, by the way. I don't know where I'd remember this stuff. I mean, seriously, you want to remember this stuff with black? I mean, e5 doesn't apparently help. Yeah, it's just running into a perpetual check apparently. I mean, we can have a look at e5. Takes, knight b5. We've still got a perpetual check. So the king's obviously exposed enough for perpetual check. But it's an absolutely crazy thing to try and remember. So queen d2 is, if you ever get this position with black, it's queen d2. So you want to give up the knight on c4, and you want to sort of offer the bishop because you get this resource bishop a6 here. So you can offer the bishop, you temporarily close the bishop, only to open it up again. That would lead to white getting mated. So the queen goes here, and then you open up the bishop after first sacrificing this one, and then you've guaranteed a draw coming up. So in this position, it's a guaranteed draw. So anyway, no, Caruana, he forgot his preparation apparently. He played in this position knight e3 check. And this is a very different story now. White's king finds shelter after king b3. He's about to play a3 and tuck his king on a2. Queen d2, threatening a mate in 1, but a3, and his king can find shelter. It's a very different story with white simply material up here. Although the knight, yeah, is stranded, but check. I mean, if he doesn't exchange off queens, white is now threatening stuff like this, etc. So we get this exchange of queens, but white is material up. Knight takes, rook takes. We see b5. And white just decides to be the exchanger. He doesn't want to play knight c3, although this might be good as well. But he actually gets a pawn for that stranded knight with knight 4 to b6. So he ends up now being the exchange up in this position after that opening. Was not remembered correctly. Bishop b7, which actually weakens d7. If he doesn't play that, I mean, if he tries to defend f7 here, well, he can't. The king's committed to protecting c8 as well. So black's in big trouble. So f7's dropping. He's got to defend d7 now. And now d7 again. Everything's coordinating on d7. So bishop e7, trying to fend off. Very good move now. One of the best moves. Rook f3. Threatening a very nasty rook c3. King c7, trying to get out of things. This might not have been the best defensive try, king c7, but it's a very difficult position indeed. You know, if king e8, we just go trebling on d7 like this. That's not very nice. So yeah, king c7, and black's just collapsing now because white plays a crusher here, a real bone crushing move which finishes off black's resistance. Can you see what it is? White's play here. White's play. What would you play as white? Sorry, have I said Caruana's playing back? No, Kariakin's playing back. Black in this game. Kariakin in this game. And this is the game which enabled Nakamura to get to 2800 on the live rating list. To that magical 2800 mark. Yeah, he played knight takes d7 here. A very neat tactic. Now, if bishop takes d7, then check is really embarrassing. Because whatever way black plays, if he plays like this, then we just double on there. There's no time for these guys to help d7. And if bishop c6, there's no time to help c6. So he's actually just won another key pawn with this blast knight takes d7, this tactical shot. So black plays rook d8. So he's not only... Okay, it seems to be an awkward knight and an awkward pin, but this is very well calculated here. Rook c3 gets out of it. It's really neat move, rook to c3 actually. And the point is, now, well, black actually resigned here. There's a really neat point here. I don't know if you want to test your calculation skills, but I want to show you another game, so I'll just show you why black might have resigned. Rook takes d7. We play this, yeah. And although there seems to be a defense of rook d6, now we just play e5, and this is just winning. Black's falling to bits. So yeah, that was an incredibly hairy opening, tactical, and you've got to know your stuff with black. I mean, I thought this variation was a bit odd with the queen coming out, but yeah, it's a very interesting idea. This queen a4, very sharp. It's a very sharp line. So black has a forced draw if he remembers how with queen d2, and if he doesn't remember how, he's just material down, as in the game. He's just black's material down here with a lost position. Okay, let's look at another game then. This one's, I think, fresh off the press. It's the game against Vishy Anand. I did have a look at it beforehand. It's quite impressive. So Vishy Anand was playing white against Nakamura. Let's take white's perspective. Okay, so d4. This game just finished today, yeah? It was just today's game. d5. So trying to play solidly with black. If you can just draw with black and try and win with white, that's the general kind of idea. of course it closes down the bishop. This classic Queen's Gambit declined. So we have knight f3, knight f6, bishop f4, and this has been used by Vichy Anand against Magnus Carlsen in the game he won in the last World Championship match, if you remember, with c5. And we have a similar sort of sequence with this early c5 here being permitted. So when it's gaining space on the queen side, has a good lock on e5 it seems, although the bishop hasn't got a pigeonhole yet. So things like knight h5 you'd think are annoying for doubling white's pawns. And in fact knight h5 is played here, just testing this. White is prepared to have the double pawns, keep a queenside space advantage, and keep a clamp on the e5 square. He just plays bishop d3. Nakamura takes this bishop out. So okay, he's got the bishop pair, but white's got quite a good grip on the position. We see b6 trying to undermine the pawn chain. b4, a5, a3. And the classic move here, c6, just to try and lock down the queen side and swap off this guy for this guy. It's a classic trade in similar positions. White castles. Okay, let's have a look at the particulars though. I think so. There's a reason why bishop a6 perhaps wasn't played immediately. Maybe it runs into something horrible. Queen c7 was played. If bishop a6 here, I'm not sure it's entirely disastrous. This is interesting. I mean, this looks as though that should be okay for black. It looks a bit like the World Championship game a little bit. But anyway, Queen c7 was played. Hitting f4 first. Okay, so that's defended. And now we see bishop a6. Rook e1. Bishop f6. King g2, and so black gets rid of his problem piece, and it seems as though should black be okay. I mean, what do you guys think about this position after rook fb8? So black hasn't got any particularly bad piece. He is suffering a bit of a space disadvantage on the queen side. So what would you prefer, white or black here? Is there any preference at this stage? At move 17. Any preference? Any thoughts? Alright, I think it's about, well, the engine valuation is dead equal actually, 000, funny enough, if that's anything to go by. Okay, we've seen the move h4, which is the sort of move I'd like to play as well, because, you know, knight g5 or on h7, I know it's pretty crude, but if we opened up the h file, you know, we've got naughties coming up, you know, maybe. But actually, Nakamura wasn't terrified of this concept of knight g5, funny enough. He just played queen a7. And probably, this probably is a bad idea, in fact, knight g5 here. Knight e2 was played. If knight g5, maybe black can just probably take here. And he's also positionally threatening to get two rooks for the queen. Let's have a quick look. Takes... I wonder if this... I think that might be okay for white. No, I think black does better here with takes. Maybe something like this. It's not too scary. I don't think there's time for anything like this. Just knight f8. Alright, so yeah. We see knight e2, g6, rook ab1. I think there's a problem. If black is tempted with a takes, I don't think this is getting enough. If we go for this line, I think there might be a problem here for black. In b5, we can force this potentially dangerous pass pawn like this. And the two rooks, I don't know if the two rooks are really that good in this particular position. So yeah, the queen side needs to be held solidly. So that might not help the cause again. So black actually played g6. We see rook ab1. Now a takes, and a bit of an infiltration, queen a2, as though it's coming with support with rook a3 at some point, maybe. Rook ec1. And yeah, it looks as though b5, you know, to try and get this pass pawn going is potentially on the cards, potentially, or even maybe something like rook a1, try and get the queen to take. We see b takes c5, b takes, and now black played h5, so locking down the king side. Not sure about this totally in this position. He could force things. Black could force things if he wanted with rook a3. I think, okay, if white plays queen d1, no, that should be okay for white. No big deal. Right, but okay, h5, and we see knight e5 now. Whoops. So knight takes e5, f takes, and possibly to keep the bishop flexible, maybe bishop d8 like in a previous game, maybe to come out, you know, later, like whoops, to a5 later. But actually bishop g7 was played. And now rook b6, installing on the queen side a rook b6, hitting c6. And black all of a sudden, he's pretty defensive here now. Black is pretty defensive in this position with this bishop here. This queen side battleground is interesting for white. You know, if rook takes b6, c takes, you know, we're all automatically on c6. And we've got a dangerous pawn. For example, like this. b7 is also, you know, this is starting to be dangerous. So yeah, this rook b6 causes rook c8 now. And now we see knight c3 hitting the queen. Queen goes back. Rook cb1. And you might think, well, can black contest this b file, or is there a big problem? I think there must be a big problem here. Queen d7 was played. If rook ab8, white has a forcing move, rook a6 and rook b6, and this is starting to be quite nasty. White could actually try and build up on c6 here. Okay, so we queen d7 here instead of trying to contest that b file. Now rook 1 to b4 is a nifty looking move because actually it supports something like queen b1 potentially. You know, that Alekhine's gun dominating that b file, and the bishop hasn't got any targets here. And f6 would drop g6, so it's difficult to break out of this position. We see bishop h6, but firing at blanks, blank targets. Knight a4. The knight really would like to use the b6 square. Queen d8, and the rook makes way for the knight with rook a6 as well as making way for rook b7 and then knight b6 later. So it seems white's making some progress here on the queen side, and it's difficult for this bishop to actually help against this queenside siege taking place here. We see king g7. I mean, what else is there to what is there to do here? In fact, if rook b8, well, that would drop a pawn actually. Rook takes, and then we can just take this pawn. So we see, yeah, Nakamura is a bit stuck here. Yeah, he plays, so this king g7, which doesn't look too hot after rook b7. The rook's kind of x-raying the king. Rook takes, queen takes. And yeah, white's building up a lot of pressure now. He can try and maybe double like this, or rook a7 or knight b6. These all look like nasty moves to deal with. So black tried to get some counterplay going on the king side. It's a bit of a stuck position. Again, c6 is a problem. If he plays rook b8, I think we just take here and we just takes... no, actually, even stronger than this, because, sorry, we don't have to be greedy here, because this might be perpetual check stuff. We can actually first just play knight b6, and then that's pretty horrible. Maybe queen c8 later, and then the knight could be munching the pawn later, which is on a light square. The endgame transition has to be looked at here. The knight's going to be pretty good at that pawn queening. So in this position, yeah, it looks like a desperate move, but rook b8 doesn't seem to do that much if played carefully by white. A desperate looking move, g5, but a very elegant response to this, which sort of minimizes black's counterplay considerably. So what would you play here after g5? So black's trying to generate some kingside counterplay. So how does white minimize counterplay? With question, that's the question. What would you play here to minimize the kingside counterplay? How would you do it? I was really impressed. It's not, maybe it's not the top engine choice, but it does seem to be an entirely logical move to shut black's counterplay down. Oh, someone's asked, could I please analyze rook a8? Okay, hold on. Okay. What? What's up with this king h3 business? Okay, a technically strong move is queen a7, but this, I thought this was a beauty, what was played, queen e2, just coming back to e2, looking at h5, forcing black to sort of shut down the king side, and then just going back. This is a beautiful sequence, little finesse, so black, you know, the lines are not being opened against the king. But before we carry on, so that was the game continuation. I thought it was really clever. Sorry, something else. Okay, instead of g5, if rook a8 had been played, by the way, queen takes, we can just take here, protecting, and we're threatening queen takes e6 because of that pin. So that's not particularly good for black at all. That looks pretty disastrous. Okay, so yeah, so g5 was tried, queen e2. So g4, the king side locked, and now going back, queen a6. And he's got things like this to put battery on f7. The battery, you know, more than one heavy piece coordinating. Queen g8. And all of a sudden, black is just collapsing here after knight b6, which hits the rook and stops rook a8. But the knight is simply heading in to f6 all of a sudden. And the bishop's in a silly place to not even defend f6. And even worse, the queen is encouraging this maneuver because it's a tempo gain on the queen. So a tempo gain first on the rook, and then another tempo gain on the rook. Now you might wonder, why did the rook go there? If the rook went here, yeah, this is interesting. I mean, it's better for white. Black's black is potentially threatening some counterplay like this, yeah. So white could shut that down with this move Queen D3 to stop this naughty Queen H7, and now be threatening Rook C7 with the knight controlling C8 to win that C6 pawn. And black's running out of moves here now in this position, so this doesn't bode well. For example, this Rook C7, it's not boding well to lose this C6 pawn. Okay, so yeah, we see this Rook F8 just asking for Knight D7 with tempo again to F6 with tempo again. So Knight D7, Queen H7, an attempt at counterplay offering exchange, but it is taken here. Check. So does this really work for black? This position, it doesn't really work out that well. Black played king takes f8. If he tries, you know, to go for a perpetual check, let's have a look. If black plays queen f3, white could even just retreat the rook, but if he wants to be flash about it, knight takes e6 check first. Queen a2 is also really good, and actually we've got this stuff. It's crushing, so we're defending adequately. So yeah, it's not looking too good, this Queen f3 try. I don't think Queen f5 is a major upgrade on that. Here just King g1, and then what's going on there? Nothing. So okay, king takes f8, so the exchange down, and white goes all in for the attack now. Check, queen c8, threatening a mate in one with queen g8, checkmate. So black has to react to that. King g6. My engine suggests it said a force mate in 27 just then. I think it's changed its mind. But yeah, queen h8, force mate in 11 now. Queen h8. And that was the first move of it. Now Nakamura resigned here. It's a forced mate in 10, this position. Black resigned. White is threatening immediately the check here, and then mate on h8. If black tries to defend here with bishop g7, then rook g8 is pretty terminal. Yeah, so that collapsed quickly for Nakamura. So I don't know what happened there. That was. It seems Vishy is very, very good in this variation with this queenside space advantage. So unfortunately for Nakamura, his live rating was knocked down a little bit, I think, from 2800 as a result of this game. I mean, he seemed to play, you know, a very solid game up to a point. The only slight downside was the queen side, it seems, but white fully kind of exploited that slight downside somehow. Some inaccuracy somewhere. The engine suggestion is bishop d8 here, by the way. Maybe this would have helped. It does help contest the b6 square. You see that was useful to white in the version of the game. When it was here, it didn't seem to participate in white's queenside siege. So yeah, white seems to just have got a queenside grip with pressure on c6. and slowly infiltrated. But I think this was a nice positional move here. Queen e2. So black never really had time to take here, because that would be either queen takes h5, but even stronger might actually be, because we're looking at f7 here, even stronger if this had occurred, queen f3 is also interesting. If something like this, check, if here, well, we take there. So yeah, this g takes h4 just simply wasn't working here. So black was kind of condemned here without much counterplay, and then white carries on with the queenside invasion. The only slight thing to be worried about is this, but yeah, it doesn't work out. Just doesn't work out. He's just in a totally lost position. Okay, but still, I find Nakamura really exciting as a player anyway. But Vishy Anand now leads the tournament actually at this stage. So yeah, congrats to Vishy for this game. Fantastic. Okay, I hope you got something out of these games. Some of them are really heavily technical and tactical. But maybe there's some positional points to try and remember about the bishop pair, sensitive points, queenside infiltrations. I hope you remember something for your own games if you do play over the board chess, and maybe to improve your understanding of chess generally. Comments or questions on YouTube. So see you next week. Thanks very much.